And now to the analysis of Shields and Brooks, syndicated columnist Mark Shields and New York Times columnist David Brooks. Welcome back. A few things bubbling under the surface of the campaign this week. I want to start with one, which was the focus on Mitt Romney and his experience at Bain Capital. Ads come out, competing narratives of that experience. Mark, why the focus on that?
Well, you're Barack Obama, and the economy is the dominant issue, economy and jobs. And Mitt Romney has better scores on the economy than you do. So you have to try and discredit or disqualify him on his economy credentials. I mean, the irony is you've got two candidates in this race, both of whom are running away from the signal legislative achievements of their career, health care. So what you've got is Romney who wants to talk about his a turnaround specialist. And what the Obama campaign is saying, well, wait a minute, this isn't all about creating jobs. It's about creating profit. Sometimes creating profit means losing jobs.
So they focused on this Kansas City steel company.
They wanted to establish that this wasn't just an economic without some pain and without some price.
What do you see in the focus on Bain Capital?
It was pretty similar to ads Ted Kennedy ran against Romney, where they got the unemployed people and said, this guy's a vampire, he destroyed our company. I personally think the ads are 80% unfair. This was a company that
the Obama
ad against the Bain activity in the steel company are mostly unfair. This was a company that was on the way down. They had no other buyer. Bain comes in, buys the company, puts in $100 million. They hang on to it for 8 years, so it's not like they're just dumping it. And then the thing ends up folding anyway. And so I think it was a legitimate business transition, an attempt to make it success. The 20% that's accurate is that they did load it with a bunch of debt, and Bain, and even though the company went down, Bain did okay. And so that part they're right about. But it gets into a larger argument about creative destruction, that we've had this ruthless
what capitalism
pruning,
is, right?
Really, a ruthless pruning on the part, especially parts of the economy that are globally competitive. Manufacturing, high tech, and it's involved tremendous productivity gains, but also tremendous layoffs. And so it's perfectly legitimate for us to have a debate about that, in part, I think, because Mitt Romney and a lot of Republicans see that churning as the model for the whole economy. And so that's a legitimate thing to talk about.
Well, that's a big debate about what capitalism is, right?
But
how does it work politically?
But it's one that Mitt Romney has chosen not to make. Mitt Romney has told us about Staples, a success, the office company, and Sports Authority, and jobs, 100,000 jobs. If you're going to say I've created 100,000 jobs, I mean, the people who got hurt were the workers. I mean, the officers didn't. The officers of the company didn't, and Bain didn't. So, I mean, this reflects a value. I mean, is it going to be decisive? No, but I mean, if you're the president of the United States and the economy is the top issue and you're running behind, you better make sure that the guy on the other side doesn't appear as a just totally faultless tribune of his position.
All right, now speaking of the nature of capitalism, another thing we learned this week is J.P. Morgan Chase, the largest bank, loses at least $2 billion, and now it's probably more like $5 billion, right? Brings up all the focus on did the banks not learn a thing from the financial crisis, and did regulation do anything, and is more needed? What do you
I don't think regulation is more needed. I think parts of regulation are more needed, but not to regulate failure. Companies are allowed to fail. People are allowed to be stupid, and they lost $2 or $5 billion. That's being stupid. They pay the price. The head of the investment strategy out, and that's the way capitalism is supposed to work. That's how you chasten companies. Where we have a public interest, and the idea of getting regulators involved and telling them, no, you can't make that hedge, you can't make that bet, you can't make that investment, that seems to me a recipe for disaster. Where we do have a public interest is making sure when people are stupid, they don't bring down the whole system. Right. And so making sure the capital requirements are high enough, that seems to me perfectly legitimate. But regulating within companies and what bets they can do and hedges and upping the regulation in that sense seems to me completely wrong.
What do you see, Mark?
I disagree. I mean, once you've got these banks that are insured by the public, as they are, and the Volcker rule, which is very straightforward, endorsed by 5 secretaries of the Treasury, which says with these deposits, you can't get into speculative enterprises and expect that you're going to be bailed out. And I think there is an overwhelming public interest here. I think Barney Frank had some legitimacy today by saying they're complaining about the costs of applying and complying with the Dodd-Frank law. The banks are saying it's 400 to 600 million, and they're talking about losing 10 times as much. And I think there is a public interest. I stand in awe of the fact that none of these guys has walked in the bar of justice. And what happened to this country? What they did to this country.
Well, you say there's a public interest. Is there public interest in this? Does it play as a political matter?
Well, I think it's
something like this
part
happens?
of the big debate we're in the middle of. And Joe Biden, the vice president, gave a speech where he talked about finance capitalism. He emphasized we've got to get back to making things. Mm-hmm. And so it was the good capitalism where the guy's out with a hammer, and the bad capitalism, these cowboys running around with credit default swaps.
I was with Secretary Geithner yesterday in a Baltimore factory, and that was the emphasis.
Making
things.
Manufacturing.
Yeah,
and so I guess we're going to have this debate. I think it's a completely bogus distinction. How do factories get capital? They get it through the capital markets. Now, I'm not crazy with all the derivatives and the credit default swaps. I'm certainly not crazy about the way people are compensated on Wall Street. But having the best capital market in the world is why we have a successful manufacturing sector. And the idea of separating the two seems to me economically illiterate. I understand politically why you want to do it, the wholesome guy with a hammer versus those rich Wall Street guys. But it seems to me economically illiterate. Nonetheless, it's part of the big debate we're having about modern capitalism. Mm-hmm. Which is a service sector. We have a service economy. This is the other problem with the Obama strategy. They talk about manufacturing. We have a strong manufacturing sector. It happens to be 10% of employment. We are a service economy, and we have to have a strategy for a service economy.
I come back to the belief that we have to make something in this country, and we are finally starting to make something. And I think that is important. In answer to your question, Jeffrey, about does it have political saliency? There's no question that President Obama's message about fairness, about playing by the same rules, about everybody having a fair shot, plays far better as a message in these times and in situations like this than does Mitt Romney's, which is sort of a back to the future. We need less regulation, less government, smaller involvement. And I think in that sense, the advantage goes to Obama and the Democrats.
Okay, another event this week is the beginning, bubbling up, dare I say it, of the debt ceiling debate again. Mm-hmm. The debate that got kicked down the road, right, last year. Was this, David, posturing, or is there a real possibility of debating it during the campaign?
Well, it was posturing. This was Boehner saying he was drawing a line in the sand, mm-hmm. saying no new taxes. We're gonna demand real spending cuts. But I think it was really more mobilizing the debate. So what happens, as everybody probably knows, is after the election in December, they have what we call Taxmageddon, where all these tax cuts, that all ends, a lot of spending, sequestration starts. We really have a bunch of things all happening at once. Mm-hmm. And it's a potential for a complete catastrophe because the whole system goes kablooey. And we're going to have to fix all these things, deal with all these incredibly complicated issues at once. And the Republicans are saying we're going to do fundamental tax reform. I happen to think they're right. Last time it took 2 or 3 years. How are we going to do it in a couple of weeks?
Right.
And so I think what they're going to end up is kicking the can down the road again, and then we'll see how the election turns out. But right now, everybody's posturing to say this is what we stand for. We stand for spending cuts, or in the Democrats' case, we stand for keeping the middle class tax cuts, but not the rich.
What do you think this was all about this week? Raising it?
I think it was all about Republican politics, and I think it was incredibly stupid. I mean, John Boehner is a savvy politician, naval politician. I think Republicans are looking at election results. They see a Lugar go down in Indiana to Murdoch. They see Orrin Hatch, who has recreated himself as a new conservative in the contemporary mold, barely holding on. Deb Fischer upsets the Republicans and the conservative establishment in the Nebraska primary with Sarah Palin's endorsement. So they're looking over their shoulder. This is what got the Republicans in the problem they're in. Last August, in that deal, right. They've never recovered from it as a negative. Interesting. David had a piece which he pointed out that in the contraceptive argument over the health care, that the Democrats' support for President Obama had fallen by 8 points. The bishops, Catholic bishops, had become the Republicans' new best friends. So by raising this issue, the Paul Ryan budget, which cuts aid to the disabled, which cuts aid to the immigrants' children, which cuts aid to the elderly and to those victims of abuse, the Catholic bishops came out and said this violates the moral code. This is a violation of our belief in common ground and common good. And so they're alienating the Catholic bishops. I mean, it makes no sense other than politically within the Republican Party.
I do agree with that. The message plays within the Republican Party, 28% of the country. It does not play outside. And in places like California, Pennsylvania, where you have a lot of Catholics, they're really in jeoparding whatever little chance they had.
All right, just a couple of minutes here, and I want to get to the last story. It's sort of a non-story story, right? This is the group of Republican political operatives, and they propose an ad, an ad campaign, right, that would tie President Obama to Reverend Jeremiah Wright, as almost happened 4 years ago. And then it quickly gets disavowed, right, by Mitt Romney and others. What was that about? Does it tell us anything about
it tells us, first of all, about greed. I mean, this was a greedy proposal. It has no political saliency to it. I mean, the issue of Reverend Wright was litigated in 2008. President Obama gave the most popular and perhaps the most persuasive speech of his career in rebuttal to it. And in the past 4 years, people have seen him go to St. John's Church and other places and so forth. So in that sense, it's playing only to the conspiracy nuts and those who are convinced that he's either from Mars or Venus or Kenya. So it really made no sense. Particularly, it made no sense for Mr. Ricketts, the owner of the Chicago Cubs, who's going to spend $10 million against President Obama while he's asking the people of Chicago to refinance the refurbishing of Wrigley Field, the home of the Cubs. This is a guy who just slit his own throat by doing this.
And the campaigns are losing control of their message with all these super PACs. And Romney, you can see how strongly he reacted. And Mark hinted at what is driving this. The consultants get paid by the amount of ads that are taken out by these rich guys. And so they have an incentive to try to pump it up in ridiculous ways. And this was an example of that.
You think we're going to see a lot more of that?
I think it's going to be one of the stories of the campaign.
All right. Mark Shields, David Brooks, thanks as always.
Thank you.